On an April morning in 2025, Prime Minister Mark Carney shocked the world with a bold announcement that would reverberate far beyond Canada's borders. Canada would impose a 25% tariff on American-made automobiles, a move that stunned both industry insiders and everyday citizens. For decades, the US-Canada relationship was a model of stability, built on trust, mutual benefit, and a shared commitment to open markets. This move signaled a dramatic rupture, shattering the sense of predictability that had defined cross-border trade for generations. The Trump administration's protectionist wave, 10% tariffs on most imports, 50% on steel, had battered Canadian industries, forcing layoffs and plant closures across the country. Ottawa saw these as an attack on free trade, not just policy, but on the very foundation of the economic partnership between the two nations. Carney, a veteran of global finance and former central banker, called the auto tariffs a necessary defense of Canadian interests and the rules-based order that had underpinned prosperity for decades. The message was clear. Canada would no longer accept economic blows without response and would stand up for its workers and industries. This was a new, assertive Canada, risking a trade war to defend its principles. The fallout was immediate and the world took notice. Canadians rallied behind Carney, tired of being pushed around by their southern neighbor and eager to see their government take a stand. Markets tumbled, auto stocks fell, and uncertainty gripped both Wall Street and Bay Street as investors scrambled to assess the new reality. By targeting autos, the heart of North American manufacturing, Canada ensured the impact would be felt on both sides of the border, affecting jobs, supply chains, and consumer prices. The stage was set for a confrontation with no clear end in sight, as both nations braced for the consequences of this unprecedented standoff. The era of quiet diplomacy was over. Canada had drawn its line and the world was watching to see what would happen next. The US-Canada border, once a symbol of trust and cooperation, became a flashpoint almost overnight. What had long been a line of friendship and opportunity was suddenly a source of anxiety and uncertainty for millions. The sudden imposition of a 25% auto tariff upended a $700 billion trade relationship, sending shockwaves through both economies and disrupting the daily lives of millions of people who relied on the border for work, business, and family. The seamless flow of goods and workers, once taken for granted, was now a source of tension and frustration. Delays became routine, and uncertainty clouded every crossing. The deeply integrated auto supply chain, where parts crossed the border multiple times before becoming a finished car, was thrown into chaos, threatening jobs and livelihoods on both sides. Costs soared, logistics faltered, and businesses on both sides faced existential threats. Political rhetoric hardened, and the sense of partnership began to erode. President Trump accused Canada of unfair practices, while Canadian leaders, including Carney, stood firm, defending their country's sovereignty and economic interests. The trust that once resolved disputes quietly behind closed doors was gone, replaced by public posturing and heated exchanges. Negotiations became spectacles, watched by a nervous public. Border communities like Windsor and Detroit felt the anxiety firsthand. Jobs, families, and daily routines were at risk. The uncertainty seeped into every aspect of life along the border. Cross-border shopping and work, once simple and routine, became fraught with uncertainty and delays. People wondered if their way of life would ever return. The trade war was no longer an abstract policy debate, it was a daily reality, fracturing a century-old friendship and leaving ordinary people to pick up the pieces. The border, once a bridge between neighbors, was now a line of division and suspicion. The rhythm of life in North America had changed, leaving towns and cities quieter, and futures more uncertain than ever before. The partnership was broken, and the consequences were deeply personal, felt in every home, every business, and every community along the border. A tariff is a tax on imported goods, charged by a government when products cross its borders. It's one of the oldest tools in international trade, and it can have a huge impact on what we buy and how much we pay. Imagine a 25% surcharge slapped onto an American truck sold in Canada. That extra cost doesn't just disappear, it gets passed on to the buyer, making the vehicle much more expensive. The main goal? To make imports pricier, nudging consumers to buy local products instead. Governments hope this will boost domestic businesses and keep money circulating within the country. For buyers, that means higher prices at the dealership. An American truck that cost $50,000 now costs $62,500 in Canada. Suddenly that local model looks a lot more appealing. But there's a downside. Sales drop, demand falls, and jobs are threatened on both sides of the border. Fewer sales mean factories slow down, and workers worry about layoffs. Tariffs are meant to protect domestic industries, but they also limit consumer choice and can stifle innovation. Companies may have less incentive to improve if competition shrinks. The real danger? Retaliation. When Canada taxed US cars, the US hit back with tariffs on Canadian goods. This back and forth can quickly spiral out of control. This tit-for-tat quickly escalates into a trade war, spreading uncertainty and risk throughout the economy. Businesses can't plan, and investors get nervous. Suddenly, it's not just auto workers at risk. Farmers, steel workers, and lumberjacks feel the pain too. Entire industries can be caught in the crossfire, even if they weren't the original target. What starts as a targeted measure can spiral, damaging economies and livelihoods far beyond the original dispute. Communities can be left struggling to recover. Tariffs are a blunt tool, often causing more harm than intended. The ripple effects can be felt in every corner of the economy, from small businesses to large manufacturers. In the Canada-US dispute, the economic fallout was swift and widespread. Stock markets reacted, ports slowed, and uncertainty grew. Trade wars rarely have winners, just collateral damage. Small towns and big cities alike can suffer as businesses close and jobs disappear. The lesson? Tariffs are powerful but unpredictable weapons. They can be used to pressure other countries, but the outcome is always a gamble. They can upend industries and lives in a matter of weeks, leaving families and workers scrambling to adapt to sudden changes. In the end, the cost is paid by workers, families, and entire communities, reminding us that trade policy isn't just about numbers, but about real people's lives. The 2025 trade war was more than tariffs. It was a battle of worldviews. Prime Minister Carney championed rules-based cooperation, believing prosperity comes from stable agreements and global institutions. President Trump saw trade as a zero-sum game, wielding tariffs as leverage to win better deals for America. Carney's tariffs were a stand for international norms. Trump saw them as defiance. The two leaders spoke different languages. One sought alliances, the other preferred unilateral power. This ideological gulf made compromise nearly impossible. Carney rallied allies, hoping collective action would check US aggression. Trump doubled down, negotiating one-on-one, confident in America's might. The dispute was about more than cars. It was about the future of global order. Cooperation versus domination. The world watched to see which vision would prevail. The outcome would shape international trade for years to come. The trade war's true cost was felt far from Ottawa and Washington. Auto workers in Michigan faced layoffs as Canadian orders dried up. Canadian families saw car prices soar, forcing tough choices or canceled purchases. Dealerships and suppliers on both sides struggled as business slowed. US retaliation hit Canadian lumber, agriculture, and more. Jobs vanished, uncertainty grew. The conflict frayed cross-border ties, shopping trips and family visits became rare. What was once neighborly routine now felt tense and uncertain. The human cost was measured in lost jobs, strained families, and eroded trust. Canada's 25% auto tariff was a calculated move, not blind retaliation. Ottawa targeted finished vehicles, sparing most US auto parts to protect Canadian factories. The aim hit US automakers' profits while minimizing harm to Canadian jobs. By excluding Mexico, Canada avoided a three-way trade war and kept supply chains intact. The strategy isolated the US as the aggressor, focusing pressure on key states like Michigan and Ohio. The hope US industry would push the White House to negotiate. Higher prices for Canadian consumers were a calculated risk. The move was precise, designed to send a message, not cause self-inflicted wounds. Canada fought with strategy, not brute force. The tariff's design showed a new kind of economic warfare, targeted, smart, and politically savvy. The world took notice of Canada's resolve and restraint. Canada's bold stand sent shockwaves worldwide. Middle powers rarely confront superpowers. Canada's move was a test case. Europe watched closely, seeing a possible blueprint for resisting US pressure. The EU, often targeted by US tariffs, debated whether to follow Canada's lead. The dispute exposed the weakness of global institutions like the WTO, sidelined by US obstruction. Canada's unilateral action was both a defense of principles and a sign of institutional failure. Other nations, from Asia to South America, saw the risks of relying on the US market. The trade war was a warning. The global order was fracturing and new alliances might be needed. the world waited to see if Canada would endure, or be forced to yield. Canada's tariffs didn't bring peace, they triggered escalation. President Trump raised tariffs on Canadian goods to 35%, targeting lumber, aluminum, and agriculture. The conflict spread beyond autos, threatening Canada's economic foundation. Ottawa offered aid, but the damage was deep. Access to the U.S. market was choked off. The USMCA trade deal was under strain, trust evaporated, and negotiations stalled. Businesses faced chaos, unable to plan for the future. Economic data turned grim, U.S. job growth slowed, Canadian industries warned of losses. The divide was no longer theoretical, it was a daily crisis for millions. The trade war's impact rippled from global giants to family businesses. With no end in sight, the economic pain was real and growing. The 2025 Canada-US trade war shattered old assumptions about global commerce. If Canada holds firm, it could inspire other nations to resist economic bullying and form new alliances. If forced to concede, it may signal that might makes right, undermining global cooperation. For ordinary people, the fallout is higher prices, job insecurity, and fewer choices. The era of cheap, globalized goods may be ending. National security could trump efficiency. The dispute is a reminder. Trade is about politics, identity, and sovereignty, not just economics. The choices made now will shape whether the world moves toward conflict or renewed cooperation. The future of prosperity and global order hangs in the balance.